What happens when a bare-handed teenager dares to face a fully armored giant? Is this merely a story told to children at bedtime? Or is it a living prophecy speaking across the ages? Picture the Valley of Elah, where tension hung thick in the air. The armies of Israel trembled, their fear palpable, as the massive figure of Goliath cast a shadow over the battlefield. Clad in bronze from head to toe, his voice thundered across the valley, mocking and daring any man to step forward. And yet, there stood a young shepherd boy, David, armed with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones plucked from the stream. His heart raced, not with fear, but with unwavering faith. The contrast was almost absurd. A giant, seemingly invincible, towering over a boy whose strength alone could not match the warriors. Yet, in that moment, the impossible hung in the balance. Every soldier in Israel's camp knew the odds were against them. Goliath was a living weapon of war, a symbol of absolute power, and David, by all appearances, was just a boy. But appearances, as history and prophecy remind us, are often deceiving. Courage, conviction, and faith can topple the mightiest of adversaries. Fast forward to our modern world. Look around today's headlines. Towering military powers flexing their muscles. Nations bristling with weapons of mass destruction. And smaller, seemingly vulnerable states facing threats that dwarf their own capabilities. Israel, though small in size, has stood in the shadow of these modern giants, navigating threats that could easily overwhelm a lesser nation, or consider any underdog nation forced to confront superpowers in today's geopolitical arena. The David to some Goliath, armed with ingenuity, faith, and resilience rather than sheer force. And so, the question becomes urgent and personal. Who is the Goliath of our time? Which superpower casts a shadow so long it seems impossible to escape? And where is the David, the unexpected champion, the seemingly insignificant yet resolute force capable of shifting the course of history? This is not just ancient history retold. It is prophecy unfolding before our eyes. The story of David and Goliath is not locked in the past. It is alive, echoing through every valley where courage confronts overwhelming odds. So I ask you, the viewer, as you watch these unfolding events around the globe, who do you see standing in the Valley of Elah today? Who embodies the Goliath, and who dares to be the David? Consider that in these stories, the giant may appear invincible, but the hand of destiny often favors the bold, the faithful, and the strategically wise. Remember, this is not just history. It is prophecy alive, breathing in the world around us, long before the Valley of Elah ever echoed with the clash of sling stones and bronze armor. The stage was set thousands of years earlier, in the shadow of history itself. To understand the battle between David and Goliath is to understand the roots of nations, the bloodlines of peoples, and the enduring echoes of the ancestors who walked the earth soon after the flood of Noah. On one side were the Philistines, a people of the coastal lands, fierce warriors and seafarers who had settled the plains of Canaan. Their origins trace back to Ham, son of Noah, through Misraim, and then along the fertile Mediterranean coast, where their cities, Gath, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gaza, would rise to prominence. These were no random bands of fighters. They were the descendants of one of the very lines that had survived humanity's great cleansing, carrying in their blood a legacy of strength, cunning, and ambition. On the other side stood Israel, the chosen people, descending from Shem, another of Noah's sons, through the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who was later named Israel. This lineage was not just a genealogical record. It was a covenant written in the stars and etched into the hearts of generations. Each battle, each challenge, and each victory was not merely a moment in time. It was the unfolding of a promise made to Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land, endure trials, and be guided by God's hand. David, the shepherd boy, was more than a youth with a sling. He was a scion of this covenant, carrying the faith, resilience, and destiny of his ancestors into the face of overwhelming adversity. The confrontation in the valley was therefore not simply a duel between a boy and a giant. It was a collision of ancestral legacies, Ham's daring and warrior spirit embodied in Goliath, versus the covenantal faith and divine promise carried by David. Every stone that flew from David's sling carried with it the weight of history, the fulfillment of prophecy, and the assertion of a people whose destiny had been shaped since the days of Noah. It was as if the world itself held its breath, recognizing that this encounter was not merely a moment of courage, but a continuation of the story of humanity itself, written in the bloodlines and soil of the ancient Near East. And yet, the significance does not end in the past. Even today, the echoes of these lineages remain palpable. Israel, small in size, but resilient in spirit, continues to endure in a region fraught with conflict and historical complexity. Across the Middle East, descendants of ancient peoples, some of whom may carry fragments of the Philistine legacy, still inhabit lands that have seen war, empire, and the rise and fall of civilizations. Every city street, every contested territory, every diplomatic negotiation carries with it the shadows of those ancient roots, reminding us that history never truly leaves the soil it was sown in. So I pose this question to you, the observer of today's world. Can we truly separate the present from the past? Can we understand the unfolding of modern geopolitics, the alliances, and the conflicts without acknowledging the ancient currents that shaped them? Every nation on the map, every ethnic group, and every people have roots that trace back to those first generations after Noah. And in some mysterious, enduring way, those lineages still speak to us through the events we witness today. Think for a moment. Do you believe that the nations and peoples on the world's political map were, in a sense, already defined in the book of Genesis? That the struggles of David and Goliath were never just a tale for children, but a reflection of deep ancestral destinies that continue to ripple across time. The valley in which David faced the giant was not just a battlefield of flesh and blood. It was a crossroads of human history, where faith, courage, and divine promise converged to shape the world as we know it. The Valley of Elah was alive with tension that day, a silence so thick it seemed to press down on the very hills. On one side, the Philistine giant Goliath towered above the Israelite army, a living monument to intimidation and brute force. His bronze armor gleamed in the sun, each step reverberating like a drum of war. Across the valley, the Israelite soldiers cowered, their hearts heavy with fear, their eyes fixed on the immovable colossus before them. And then, from the hills above, came the unexpected figure, a young shepherd boy named David, carrying nothing but a sling, a small pouch of stones, and a faith that could move mountains. This was not just a battle. This was the first prophetic clash, a confrontation between divine destiny and earthly power, between covenant and conquest. Every eye in the valley could see it. David was untrained, unarmored, and seemingly outmatched. Yet he carried the weight of a promise older than any kingdom, a covenant between God and the people of Israel. The clash of stone against flesh, of faith against intimidation, symbolized far more than personal courage. It represented the collision of God's plan with the arrogance of human empires. Goliath was not merely a soldier. He was the embodiment of oppressive power, of worldly authority standing against the will of the Most High. And as David stepped forward, the valley seemed to hold its breath. He did not cry out for reinforcements, nor did he rely on the sword and shield of man. Instead, he called upon a higher strength, a power that transcended muscle and metal. The stone flew from his sling, striking the giant in the forehead, and the seemingly impossible fell before the impossible. In that moment, the line between prophecy and history blurred. The battle became a living testament to the idea that faith, when anchored in covenant, could triumph over any earthly might. The resonance of this story is not confined to the pages of the Bible. Look at the world today, and you see modern Davids and Goliaths repeating this ancient pattern. Israel, small in size but fortified by its faith and history, faces nations that wield immense military power, nations whose ambitions echo those of Goliath. Ukraine stands today as another David against the overwhelming force of Russia, embodying courage and resilience that defy mere statistics. In every modern conflict, the principle remains. Those who carry the covenant of righteousness and justice confront powers that seek to dominate through fear and oppression. So I ask you, the witness of history and contemporary struggle, if you were David, would you step forward, armed only with a sling and unshakable faith, to face a towering Goliath? Could you trust that divine providence would guide your hand when every worldly measure seemed stacked against you? The Valley of Elah was a stage for a timeless lesson, one that continues to play out in cities, fields, and valleys across our world today. The clash of the first prophetic battle reminds us that courage anchored in principle and faith can shake the foundations of empires and alter the course of history. Indeed, the story of David and Goliath is never just about one boy and one giant. It is about the eternal tension between covenant and power, between divine will and human ambition. And as we watch modern Davids rise in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, we are reminded that prophecy is not confined to the past. It lives, breathes, and acts through those willing to step into the valley of challenge with nothing but faith as their armor. After the echo of stones faded in the Valley of Elah, Israel's journey had only begun. The young shepherd who felled the giant grew to become a king, David uniting the tribes of Israel into a single, formidable kingdom. His son Solomon would later build the majestic temple in Jerusalem, a beacon of faith and culture demonstrating that even a small nation, guided by divine purpose, could rise to greatness. Yet, as Israel thrived, the world beyond its borders was in motion. Mighty empires rose and fell like tides against the shores of history, each leaving its mark on the tapestry of nations. The Assyrians carved their empire with iron and fire, crushing opposition with disciplined legions and ruthless strategies. Babylon followed, a city of splendor and intimidation, where the hanging gardens reached for the heavens and kings ruled with absolute authority. Persia extended its influence across continents, uniting vast lands under a single crown, while Egypt lingered as a perennial power along the Nile, rich in culture and intrigue. And through it all, the prophets Daniel and Ezekiel watched, recording visions and dreams that would foretell the succession of empires long before their rise. Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream revealed the shifting powers of the world: the golden head, the silver chest, the bronze belly, and the iron legs, each symbolizing an empire, each a warning of the impermanence of human might. Ezekiel's visions of the fallen cities and exiled people reminded Israel that worldly power, no matter how imposing, was ultimately subordinate to divine authority. These ancient patterns echo in our modern world. Today we watch the rise and fall of nations with similar grandeur and menace. The United States projects influence across oceans with its unparalleled military and economic might. Russia exerts its power with strategic precision and historical ambition. China emerges as a global force, reshaping trade, technology, and geopolitics with methodical planning. The European Union wields its collective weight, often subtly but decisively, in diplomacy and economics. Each modern empire mirrors the ancient superpowers in some way: prideful, ambitious, and sometimes overreaching. And just as the prophets warned Israel to discern the true power behind the kingdoms, so too must we examine today's giants and the unseen forces guiding their actions. History shows us that no empire, however grand, is eternal. Babylon fell, Persia was absorbed, and Assyria's roar faded into the desert winds. The rise of Israel under David and Solomon was a counterpoint to these worldly powers, a reminder that divine guidance can elevate the small and humble, and that the true measure of a nation lies not only in its armies or wealth, but in its faithfulness to a covenant that transcends generations. The prophetic words etched by Daniel and Ezekiel are not relics. They are lenses through which we can interpret the ambitions, alliances, and conflicts of the modern age. So I leave you with this question. As you survey the current landscape of global power, consider the empires of today. Which nation carries the might and hubris of Babylon? Who embodies the quiet, yet resilient faith of Israel? The patterns of history are rarely hidden. They repeat, echoing across millennia. The rise and fall of empires is not only a story of conquest, but of divine orchestration. A reminder that while human ambition may shape the world, the ultimate narrative belongs to forces far greater than kings, presidents, or generals. In every negotiation, in every clash of ideologies, and in every military maneuver, we see the fingerprints of history and prophecy intertwining. Modern nations may wear the armor of technology and diplomacy instead of bronze and iron, yet the essence remains unchanged. Power is tested, character is revealed, and the lessons of the prophets continue to guide those who have eyes to see. The world stage today is a valley much like Elah, where Davids and Goliaths, large and small nations alike, prepare to play their roles in a drama that began thousands of years ago. And as history unfolds, we are reminded once more that the story of empires is also a story of divine foresight, a living prophecy still in motion. Throughout Israel's history, the voice of prophecy was never distant. It thundered through the corridors of power and whispered warnings to kings and commoners alike. Samuel confronted Saul, anointed by God, yet swayed by pride and fear, cautioning him that disobedience would cost him the kingdom. Nathan stood before David, the man after God's own heart, delivering a divine indictment for sin and ambition, reminding even the greatest of men that their authority was borrowed and temporary. And the prophets of Israel, the mournful Jeremiah, the fiery Isaiah, and the watchful Ezekiel, rose repeatedly to warn a nation teetering between obedience and destruction. Their words were not idle. They carried the weight of imminent consequence, a reminder that the covenant with God was not abstract, but demanded vigilance, humility, and righteousness. History confirms their warnings. Babylon, the once mighty empire, marched across the land, destroying Jerusalem, burning the temple, and exiling the people into distant lands. The streets that had echoed with prayers and songs fell silent. Under the weight of foreign boots, every brick and stone seemed to cry the truth of the prophets, that human power, no matter how commanding, is fleeting, and that divine judgment can descend with the precision of a storm. The exile was a living testament, a fulfillment of warnings spoken centuries before, etched into the annals of both history and scripture. Israel's suffering was not random. It was a mirror reflecting choices, obedience, and defiance, showing that prophecy is not merely prediction, but the revealing of cause, consequence, and divine oversight. Today, the echoes of these prophetic warnings resonate in a world both familiar and frighteningly new. Nations wield weapons of unprecedented destruction, from nuclear arsenals that can erase cities in moments to cyber tools capable of disrupting societies without firing a single bullet. Alliances form and fracture with the same intensity as ancient coalitions, while invisible threats like pandemics remind us that human fragility remains unchanged, no matter the sophistication of our technology. Are these events mere coincidence, the product of human politics and ambition? Or could they be the modern-day reverberations of the same prophetic voice that once warned kings and nations? The parallels are unsettling. A world brimming with power, yet teetering on the edge of moral and existential collapse. The prophets of old did not speak for spectacle. They spoke to awaken, to provoke reflection and humility. Their words demanded that people see beyond immediate conflicts, beyond political maneuvers, and recognize patterns ordained by a force greater than themselves. Babylon's conquest, Assyria's dominance, and Persia's expansion were not merely historical episodes. They were lessons in obedience, justice, and the perils of hubris. In the same way, the complex geopolitics of our era, from the tensions between superpowers to the shadowy threats of rogue states and technological warfare, echo those same timeless lessons. The challenge today is whether we recognize the significance of these warnings, whether we see the unfolding events as part of a greater narrative, or dismiss them as mere chance or political maneuvering. So I leave you with a question that the prophets would likely pose to us now. As you witness nations deploying unprecedented power, forming alliances, and confronting existential threats, do you see the hand of divine foresight at work? Or are these events simply the product of human ambition and folly? The lines between prophecy and politics blur in a world that mirrors the biblical stage, where choices carry consequences, not just for individuals, but for entire nations. Whether we recognize it or not, history continues to speak, and its voice is unmistakable for those willing to listen. Are we witnessing the fulfillment of ancient prophecy, or just modern politics in disguise? In the echoes of ancient battles, we find ourselves witnessing modern David versus Goliath confrontations that could have stepped straight out of the Valley of Elah. Israel, a nation small in land but vast in historical and spiritual weight, faces pressures from powerful neighbors, from Iran to the broader Arab world, each move on the chessboard resonating with echoes of the past. Across the globe, Ukraine stands against a military juggernaut in Russia, its citizens armed with courage, resilience, and faith in their cause. Far to the east, Taiwan navigates the shadow of China's overwhelming might, a small island whose people face existential threats that dwarf their own physical scale. Each of these confrontations mirrors the biblical story of a young shepherd facing a towering warrior. The odds are staggering, yet courage, conviction, and divine purpose can defy the expected outcome. The media paints these events with the same intensity as ancient scripture would narrate epic clashes. CNN and BBC broadcast images and analysis as if the world is watching a new battle in the Valley of Elah unfold daily. Satellite images, interviews with citizens, and live footage of conflict zones transform distant struggles into immediate, visceral experiences. To the observer, the storylines are almost cinematic. A smaller nation standing its ground against overwhelming military might, relying on strategy, ingenuity, and unwavering resolve. Just like David with his sling and stones, these modern Davids depend on factors beyond mere physical strength. The faith of a people, the unity of a nation, and the hope that righteousness may prevail over brute force. Yet, the comparison is not just about size or weaponry. It is about principle. David's confrontation with Goliath was not simply a personal duel. It was a struggle for the covenant, for justice, for the moral order. Likewise, today's smaller nations often see themselves as guardians of values, culture, and faith against forces that seem determined to overwhelm them. The stakes are spiritual as well as strategic. Every missile intercepted, every border defended, every act of resistance carries echoes of those biblical battles. As if the lessons of faith, courage, and divine purpose are replayed on the modern stage. And here is where the question deepens. In these stories of small nations standing against giants, how much is myth and how much is reality? Israel, at the crossroads of history and prophecy, is not merely a geopolitical player. It is a symbol, a living testament to the endurance of faith and the unfolding of ancient promises. But do we, the observers, see the nation as the center of prophecy, as the shepherd confronting Goliath of our times? Or do we allow the narrative to be inflated, creating heroes and villains larger than life, while the real dynamics are political, strategic, and entirely human? The parallels are striking and impossible to ignore. Ancient prophecy finds its reflection in the headlines of today: the courage of the weak, the defiance of those facing overwhelming power, and the moral questions that hover over every battle. These are timeless. And just like David in the Valley of Elah, the outcome is never guaranteed. It is shaped by faith, by strategy, and perhaps by forces beyond our comprehension, reminding us that the story of David and Goliath is never truly ancient. It is living, breathing, and unfolding around us. So, tell me, do you believe Israel today is truly the center of prophecy, or just a small nation magnified by history and the media? The battlefield is more than earth and stone. It is unseen, yet undeniable. As Ephesians 6:12 warns us, For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Goliath was not merely a man. He was a manifestation of darkness, a towering presence that sought to intimidate, to crush faith. Under the weight of his armor, David, on the other hand, stood armed with nothing but a sling, a stone, and unwavering trust in God, a symbol of light confronting shadow. Today, the echoes of that ancient confrontation resonate across the globe. Behind the facades of diplomacy and international alliances, the real battle rages. NATO and the United Nations are not just political entities. They are theaters where unseen spiritual forces exert influence. The superpowers, bristling with nuclear arsenals, economic leverage, and technological dominance, carry shadows that extend far beyond human ambition. Each maneuver, each strategic alliance, each conflict carries an imprint of a larger, cosmic struggle that ordinary eyes cannot see. Yet, as in David's time, the small, the faithful, the seemingly weak can alter the course of history. A single act of courage, guided by divine purpose, can topple giants. The world may focus on treaties and troop movements, but the perceptive heart discerns the clash of light against darkness. Every headline, every global crisis, every surge of courage or fear is a reminder that the spiritual war has never paused. It has only changed its battlegrounds. So we must ask ourselves, are we witnessing mere politics, or are we standing at the threshold of a spiritual confrontation that transcends nations and armies? As you watch the news unfold and the world's powers collide, reflect on this. Do you believe this is just political maneuvering, or the very real war of spiritual forces in our time? The prophet spoke of a day when the final confrontation would shake both heaven and earth, a battle known as Armageddon. On the Mount of Olives, Scripture tells us, the Messiah will return, his feet standing on that sacred ground. As the nations gather in defiance, the heavens will split open, light piercing the darkness, and the armies of the world will realize their weapons are useless before the King of Kings. Imagine the sound of the trumpet resounding across every corner of the earth, summoning not only soldiers, but souls to witness the final reckoning. The enemies of God will melt away, not by human hands, but by the fire of His presence. The imagery is breathtaking, but it also feels alarmingly close. Our modern world is armed with tools of unimaginable power. Nuclear arsenals capable of erasing cities in a heartbeat, cyber weapons able to paralyze nations without a single shot fired, and a web of globalization that ties the destiny of every people together. Could it be that these very instruments, born of human ambition and fear, are the stage upon which the last prophetic drama will unfold? What the prophets described with visions of swords and fire may now be seen in missiles and digital code. The battlefield may look different, but the essence remains the same. Humanity standing at the edge of history, forced to choose between submission to God or rebellion against Him. This is no longer just theology. It is the lens through which we must interpret our times. Each crisis, each escalation, each alliance brings us one step closer to the moment the prophets foresaw. The coming fulfillment is not a distant myth, but an approaching reality where prophecy and history converge. So I ask you, when you watch the world tremble with conflict and uncertainty, when you hear of wars, rumors of wars, and weapons poised for destruction. Do you believe we are nearing that final chapter? Tell me, which stage of the prophetic flow do you think we are living in today? As we close this journey, we return to where it all began, with a boy and a giant in the valley of Elah. David versus Goliath is not a bedtime story meant to entertain children. It is a prophetic pattern, a living model for every struggle throughout history, where the weak stand against the strong, where faith confronts fear, and where divine purpose collides with human arrogance. That single stone slung across the valley was more than an act of courage. It was a declaration that God's covenant prevails over the mightiest of enemies. From that battlefield to the rise and fall of empires, from the exile in Babylon to the warnings of prophets, from the great wars of the past to the geopolitical storms of our present, the pattern repeats. David and Goliath echo in every conflict where power towers over principle, where nations and leaders are forced to choose whether to trust in their own strength or to yield to the will of the Almighty. And so we look at today's headlines with new eyes. Israel and Iran locked in a dance of tension. Russia and Ukraine clashing on the plains of Europe. The United States and China maneuvering for dominance. All these are more than politics. They are the continuation of an ancient drama, prophecy in motion, history echoing across time. Every news report is not only information, it is an invitation to discern the deeper battle, the divine thread woven into human affairs. This is why David versus Goliath still matters. It is not locked in the past, nor confined to Sunday school lessons. It is alive in every struggle of the weak against the mighty, every act of faith against fear, every stand for truth in a world where darkness seeks to dominate. The sling and the stone remind us that God's hand still guides history, no matter how overwhelming the odds may appear. So, let me ask you plainly, do you believe we are living in prophetic times? If you do, declare it boldly in the comments with these words: I am awake. And if you are skeptical, if you wrestle with doubt, then share your thoughts as well. I will read every word, because this conversation is not just about history. It is about our place in the unfolding story of God and humanity. And as for what comes next, there remains a mystery still to be unveiled, one that has haunted scholars, theologians, and nations alike, the enigma of modern Babylon. Who is Babylon today? How does it fit into the prophetic puzzle that is rapidly unfolding? That, my friends, is a story for the next chapter. Stay with us, for the mystery of modern Babylon is yet to be revealed. Lord Almighty, just as you guided David in the valley against Goliath, guide us today as we face the giants of our time. Strengthen our faith, steady our hearts, and open our eyes to see your hand moving through history. Keep us awake, O God, and help us to walk in courage and truth until the day of your return. Amen.